going on, everybody? Welcome to the SchuZ Show. I'm your host, SchuZ Shoemaker, and today there's going to be a lot to unpack. There's not going to be a guest on the boxing show today. I do have a second show coming up later on today, which will be featuring a basketball player. We'll get into that show later on. But today's boxing show, there's a lot to unpack from this past weekend. Not a lot of boxing news regardless of other things, but lots to unpack from what was an eventful and spectacular weekend of boxing. So I want to break down a lot of this right now, and there's no other way I could possibly start the show off other than talking about the main event. Let's go through this entire show right now because, listen, when we talk about Saturday, the card was fine, and I'll get into the rest of the card momentarily. But there are some things that I got to get into first and foremost because we might have just witnessed the potential fight of the year on the main event on the evening of Saturday. When I look at what occurred on Saturday, it was not only spectacular what happened to the ring, but also what was spectacular about that night was the build-up process. Was the everything going on around the large-scale picture of the main event. And listen, when I look at the first third of the year now, 4 months of the year down, I have three candidates for fight of the year. Pitbull versus Fierro, Taraji versus Kui, and Chris Eubank Jr. versus Conor Benn. Now, what makes this one a little bit more different than those other two? Well, this one took place in front of 68,000 people, I believe it ended up being listed at. And there was such a build-up. Let me set the stage for you guys. This fight was supposed to happen multiple years ago. Conor Benn obviously goes through his PED issue, gets suspended, cannot fight up until the point when we see Conor Benn obviously get back into the ring, get cleared, and able to go fight Chris Eubank Jr. They get the fight made, and the build-up process to this fight ends up becoming one of the most entertaining prospects and things that we have witnessed for quite some time. All these things are emerging from the suspensions, the fines, all these things happen in this build-up process. And all the way up until the fight, more and more things continue to occur. Now, whether that was planned or not, we have to give props to both Conor Benn and Chris Eubank Jr. because they sold the show and they made this event much, much bigger than it probably ever would have been had they not put in and invested in the countless different efforts they put into it to make this such a large-scale, massive fight. The main thing I want to go into, though, is you can't deny how spectacular it was when you get Chris Eubank Jr. showing up, pulling into the parking garage, and out comes his father. Now, the backstory for those that are not familiar with this, they don't have the greatest relationship in the world. They don't talk very often, if not for a while now. And all of a sudden, nobody expected Chris Eubank Sr. to show up with Jr., and then we see them both come out of the car. And it doesn't just end there then, no, because then we go to the ring walk, and both Conor Benn and Chris Eubank Jr. had exceptional ring walks. But what was spectacular about Chris Eubank Jr.'s was they had his dad right beside him. Both guys did walk out to the father's music, and just the entire scene was phenomenal. But let's get into what actually happened in this fight now, because it was spectacular. For those that do not know the results, Chris Eubank Jr. defeats Conor Benn via unanimous decision, 116-112 across all three scorecards. In my opinion, that scorecard was a little bit wider than I would have liked to see. I don't think there was that many rounds that Chris Eubank Jr. won over Conor Benn. I could see the rounds in which people would probably say, okay, I think Chris Eubank Jr. maybe did do that. For me, I personally had it listed as a draw for myself. However, I also was kind of torn. I think it was round 1 and round 7. I forgot off the top of my head, I think it was. Those were two rounds I did have that were very, very close. So obviously, if you swing those rounds away to Chris Eubank Jr., obviously he has a much more clear, wider win margin there. However, I did have it as a draw, in my opinion, in this fight. But let's go through what happened here. You talk about both guys, and this went exactly according to how some people would expect in terms of Chris Eubank Jr.'s performance. But I think, and I said this on Friday's show, I thought that this was an opportunity where Conor Benn could, in a sense, emerge victorious from a standpoint of his career moving forward, if that makes sense. Okay, Chris, what do I mean by that? Well, Conor Benn did not get the win. He has a loss on the loss column now. But whether you love him or hate him, you cannot deny the fact that what Conor Benn did this weekend was that Conor Benn went into this fight having to move up essentially 2 weight classes, right? And he put on an incredible performance and shocked a lot of people. This was a much, much more competitive fight than I even thought it was. What I personally thought was going to happen, I said this on Friday's show, was that Chris Eubank Jr. would win the fight. However, I thought that Conor Benn, if he had a shot at winning it, it would have only been an entertaining fight for the first 3 to maybe 6 rounds, due to the fact that Conor Benn was going to come out with a lot more energy, a lot more power, and try to go for the KO immediately. But what did we end up seeing in reflection in that fight? Conor Benn was able to sustain himself for the most part throughout the entirety of that fight, making it an incredible ending to that fight. I mean, that 12th round, I'm not sure we're going to see a greater 12th round of action than what we witnessed on Saturday. And here's what's special. I just want to say this. I saw a tweet about this. I don't know who posted it, but this was exactly point on. When boxing is done properly, and what I mean by that is you have the fans behind them, and you talk about two boxers that go out there, lay it all out on the line, and fight with that warrior mentality, nothing gets better than boxing. That was a beautiful thing to witness, what we saw, especially those championship rounds. And then the cherry on top of that 12th round. Absolutely incredible. And so I do have to give props. I know a lot of people hate Conor Benn. People don't necessarily like him, but I have to give props where props are due. Both of those guys gave us potentially the fight of the year. Conor Benn moved up 2 weight classes and still made it a very, very competitive fight. I'm not someone that has a lot of favorites or people that I hate. I don't have any of those, honestly, when it comes to boxing. I like to evaluate it from a neutral standpoint. And what I witnessed in that fight was an incredible way to end a card that was, to be fair, a little bit boring in different stances, right? There was not a lot of fights that were very entertaining. But then you talk about what happened in that main event. You can't deny the fact that both those guys, and give props for what both those guys went out there and did. So let's break down this fight now, because when you talk about this fight overall, it was a brutal, brutal fight. Eddie Hearn said something that I think is very, very key, and we're going to talk about potential rematch clauses, also what could be next for both guys to hear momentarily. But what Eddie Hearn said is something that I think is very accurate. He talked about the potential rematch between these two guys, but he said, listen, for a guy like Conor Benn and even Chris Eubank Jr., both guys taxed their bodies drastically in this fight. When you talk about Chris Eubank Jr., his was mostly done when it was in the build-up process for the weight cutting. That was a brutal, brutal weight cutting he had to go through. And that is not easy on the organs of your body. We all know weight cutting is one of the most dangerous aspects of boxing or all combat sports. And that was a brutal, brutal weight cut for him. And then he goes into the ring and he ends up being hospitalized afterwards. It was just precautionary, but he is hospitalized just to mostly check out his kidney, his brain, and his heart in this instance. But all was good there. It was okay. He's nothing too severe. There's no broken jaws, rumors were speculating. As for Conor Benn, you do talk about a guy that is significantly bigger than you in that ring. And taking that punishment, that beating, especially when you get to those championship rounds that I've alluded to, this is the type of fight where, let's just be honest, not only does it limit the career and longevity of fighters, it could also impact their lives when we talk about long-term situations. This was a brutal, brutal fight that we don't see very, very often in boxing to this extent anymore. And yet what we witnessed was two guys that went out there, laid it all on the line. That's why I say hats off to both guys. And so let's get into now what could be next for these two guys, because when I look at these two guys, let's start with Chris Eubank Jr., the champion here. There's a few options on the table for him. What Chris Eubank Jr., we've always discussed about him, was saying, hey, there's been so many opportunities for you to go pursue world championships. Why not go pursue them? And there's always been question debate around this for Chris Eubank Jr. However, what I would say I've realized in this situation is that, listen, there could be a big payday again, and if he does a rematch with Conor Benn. That is clearly on the table. Both promoters, everyone involved is already discussing that this is very, very likely for September, a rematch. But if we're looking at it from Chris Eubank Jr.'s standpoint, he has a win against Conor Benn. It is what it is. What you could do is obviously do the rematch, but here's a couple of the options I came up with. I think one that we could very likely see, and I don't think it's going to be a very competitive fight, but I think we could potentially see a Canelo Alvarez versus Chris Eubank Jr. fight. Now, am I very, very big on that fight? Not necessarily. What I'm talking about here is that, listen, we know Canelo Alvarez on the back end of his career. He already has his fight upcoming this weekend on Saturday, booked, obviously William Skull. Then he goes out and is likely fighting Bud Crawford in September. He's not going to fight again, most likely, until this weekend next year on Cinco de Mayo weekend in May. That would be the target date I'd look at. And why do I think that would be possible? Well, Chris Eubank Jr. can obviously fight at 160 or move up to 168. He's pretty much able to do either weight class there. If you're going up to 168, there's no one really that big of a platform and a brand than Canelo. And the branding and the image, the loving that Chris Eubank Jr. currently has, does put him in position to have a mega, mega fight with Canelo Alvarez. I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm just saying that this makes the most sense, because at 168, with as big as Chris Eubank Jr. is right now, I mean, there are big names, sure. Caleb Plant's a solid name. Edgar Berlanga, sure. But none of those fights make sense for him. They're not for a world championship. Canelo's going to have all the belts come Saturday, in my opinion. I don't think William Skull's getting them. If William Skull does, then we'll see what happens. But I think Canelo Alvarez is going to have all the belts there. If we go to 160, then you do have other options. You have one of the champions there. Adames is obviously a solid champion. You have Janabek and you have Laura. Do any of those fights make sense to me, or does he even want to stay at 160? That's to be determined. And I do think we also will have a Janibek versus Adames unification fight coming up soon. I know that's been in the speculation rumor, so we'll see what happens there. But that could make for a huge fight there. Chris Eubank Jr. going up against the guy that wins the unification that has 3 belts between Janibek or Adames. That would be on the table. I'll list one more option that, once again, I did mention these 2 guys' names, but there's going to be a fight July 12th in New York City. It's a headlining event. While it's controversial as to whether or not they should be headlining, Edgar Berlanga versus Hamza Shiraz. I just said I'm not a massive fan of the Edgar Berlanga fight, but when we talk about Edgar Berlanga and Hamza Shiraz, the winner of that fight will have a much more significant branding and name and image behind them. That could potentially make sense. I'm not a big fan of that fight, to be honest with you guys. However, I could see that being on the table because of the fact that there are obviously Turkey ties here between Chris Eubank Jr. and his promotions and everything along that there. And we do know how much Turkey specifically loves Hamza Shiraz. Could that be the fight that gets put together? I personally don't really want to see that fight, but I could see it happen. I think the most likely options that the 3 things I'd say for Chris Eubank Jr. is you have a championship fight with whoever unifies between Adames and Janibek. If that fight comes to fruition, you have the rematch with Conor Benn, or you go and fight Canelo Alvarez for undisputed. Probably going to be roughly around May of next year, unless there's another day that Canelo's going to fight at. That's what I've got for Chris Eubank Jr. Let's go to Conor Benn now. He has a lot more options on the table, one of which is the rematch. And I'll just put this out there. There's a lot of controversy, a lot of debate. Should the rematch happen? I know Chris Eubank Sr. is not a big fan of this whole thing going on. He keeps telling the media to call this out and so on and so forth. And I see his point. Weight classes do matter. But we can't deny the fact that Conor Benn did show up and perform very, very well in that fight. My thing about the rematch is, does a rematch make sense for Conor Benn? Will he be able to perform any better than he did Saturday? Possibly. I mean, I'm never going to doubt somebody, but at the same time, Conor Benn probably had the best performance he could possibly have against Chris Eubank Jr. And as long as they'd have to have all the rematch, rehydration clauses, everything still in place for it to even make sense again. So is the rematch possible? Sure. Would I be against it? Absolutely not. And in fact, just put out the facts right now, Turki Al-Sheikh has already said this. He is hoping to stage a Chris Eubank Jr. Conor Benn rematch in September back at Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. We'll see what happens. That is obviously on the table. We could see it. Eubank and Benn have already agreed to terms and are contracted for a rematch as they sign for a 2-fight deal. So is the rematch possible for this fight? Absolutely. And am I against it? No. However, is that what makes the most sense for both guys? I don't think so. I think that when you look at the potential opportunities for these guys in terms of Chris Eubank Jr. becoming a world champion at a weight class that makes more sense for him, that would be huge for himself. As for Conor Benn, there are a lot more options on the table. Let me break them down for you. He goes back down to 147. It might be tough for him to make 147. We'll see if he can do it or not. But listen, 147, you have a guy, Mario Barrios. I know there's rumors of a Manny Pacquiao fight now coming together. They've been agreed to. I hope to God that did not happen. I've already given my thoughts on that disgrace. But Mario Barrios is an option on the table for yourself. Jerome Boots Ennis, that would be huge. And Brian Norman Jr. Now, Brian Norman Jr. is obviously having his fight in June, if I'm not mistaken, against Jin Sasaki. So that belt could be up in the balance. But also, let me say this. If you look at 147, we know some other names coming up too. In fact, a few of those guys who will be fighting this upcoming weekend. Ron Garcia, Devin Haney, potentially even Teofimo Lopez. All are guys that have had the names flooded with potentially moving up to 147. Those would all be massive fights. And I think for Conor Benn, you talk about Conor Benn versus any of those guys I just listed, we're looking at a pretty big fight there. So a lot of options on the table at 147 if he can make that weight cut. Moving up to 154. That is a division that I think is the most deep, talented weight class in boxing right now. You can debate that with a couple others, light heavyweights certainly up there, so on and so forth. But when we talk about 154, there are some boys there. Let's look at some of the guys. Bud Crawford is the big name. I don't think that fight's going to come to fruition. My personal opinion, Bud Crawford is fighting Canelo in September. If there's a rematch clause involved there, we might see that. If not, it would not shock me if Bud Crawford walks away from boxing at that point in time. I don't see a Bud Crawford fight happening there. I also do not even know if Bud Crawford will fight at 154 ever again. So that belt could become vacant. And if it becomes vacant, here's a fight I could propose for people. You could have Conor Benn face Virgil Ortiz Jr. I think everybody believes that Virgil Ortiz Jr. is the best guy at 154 that is not a champion currently. That would be a mega fight to have happen. Whether that be in the United States or you have them in the UK, that's a massive fight to make. Let's swing over to other options now. 154, Sebastian Fundora is available there. That could be an interesting fight. Or Bakram Mursavaliev. As for Bakram, I think he is a dangerous fighter. And I don't know if that's the type of fight that makes sense for Conor Benn to come right to 154 and fight against a guy like that. However, that is on the table. And then the final option for Conor Benn is a rematch. We already discussed that. Does it make sense? Sure. Financially, he's going to make a massive bag again. Is it already kind of in place? Yes. But once again, like what Eddie Hearn said, do you want to put Conor Benn in a situation where he's going to go up there and fight a guy 2 weight classes bigger than him and try to combat a guy like that, taking on the damage, taking all those different things going to happen to him? That's a question that they need to decide upon. Conor Benn's already working out. He posted a video this morning talking about getting back on the treadmill, working out, staying in shape, getting ready. I personally think that's what he's going to want. I think there's a lot of money in that fight, but I'm just saying you have to be smart about your career. Does it make more sense to go pursue a world championship at 147 or 154 and save your body some? Or do you just want to cash out, get the Chris Eubank Jr. fight, and see where you go from there? They have to decide that. That's just my opinions on those things. However, as I said, though, I just have to give massive props once again. Chris Eubank Jr., Conor Benn, love him or hate him, those guys came out, put on a show on Saturday night. They gave us what could very likely end up being the fight of the year in 2025. Hats off to both those guys. Let's head over to what the co-main event was. And as I said, the undercard on paper, and I predicted this upcoming on Friday's show. I said, listen, there's a lot of things that could happen on Friday. But when it comes to this card, I would not be entirely shocked to see there be a lot of fights that some people would say would be snooze fest, if you want to say that. Now, I did enjoy some of the fights. I think some of them were, you have to really enjoy boxing to like them. I think there was more things I took away from certain aspects about fighters as opposed to saying they were great fights. What do I mean by that? Well, I think Aaron McKenna, I'll discuss him very shortly, was great. I also think Vidal Riley, I want to talk about him more in depth soon as well. But let's go to the co-main event. Anthony Yarde and Arthur. Everybody said that this was the fight, the trilogy that nobody wanted to see happen. Does everybody still feel that way as if you could go back in time? Would you still want to see the fight again? You know, let's be honest. It was not the most entertaining fight in the world. Now, what I will say is I was a little bit surprised that the way that Anthony Yarde fought. And I'll say this. It drives me crazy, actually. Let me go a little bit deeper than I expected about this one. Anthony Yarde is a guy that I believe has so much potential and talent. Now, his career is coming closer because he's getting older and older. But when we talk about the body work, the God-given abilities that Anthony Yarde has, and yet you look at the resume that he's compiled, it just makes you scratch your head a little bit. He's a good fighter, or at least he has potential to be a really good fighter. But it's just, I don't get it. So something does not click when it comes to Anthony Yarde and what he brings to the table. You see the body, you see the potential, you see what God just blessed him with in terms of his body and his ability to fight. And yet he goes out there and it's just like, what are you doing? We go back to the second fight of Anthony Yarde and Lyndon Arthur. You KO him in the fourth round. You should be even in a better position now, I would imagine, to be in a KO position, and it just looked like he wasn't going for the KO. It was frustrating to watch. Now, yes, he got the win over Lyndon Arthur, as I expected him to do. And it was a 116, 112 on two scorecards, 115, 113 on the other one. It's just like there's such a higher ceiling, I feel like, for Anthony Yarde than just not wanting to tap into and reach. And I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's trainers. I don't know if it's just his own personal drive. I don't know what it is, but I feel like there's another level of development, another level that he could have reached in his career. But for some reason, he's failed to do so. However, he did win that fight. And so you have to ask, what is next for him? What I will say is that when I watched that fight, what became very clear and evident to me is that when I observed the light heavyweight division, a division that I think is very, very, very good, my opinion, the second best division in boxing at the moment, I think there is a massive gap between Anthony Yarde, Lyndon Arthur, and that top tier guys. Who's those top tier guys? Obviously Bivol, Beterbiev, David Benavidez, Callum Smith, those type of guys. I think those guys are night and day above what we witnessed in Anthony Yarde and Lyndon Arthur. And because of that performance, yes, Anthony Yarde got the victory, but I don't think he belongs anywhere near the discussion for a fight against, the winner Beterbiev and Bivol, going and fight a guy like David Benavidez. I don't think he should even be in discussion for Callum Smith. I don't think that fight's going to go very well for him. So what do I think next for Anthony Yarde? There was a fight that was supposed to happen maybe a couple years ago. It was building, and now it's no longer as big as it once was. However, it still makes sense for both guys. That's fighting Joshua Buatsi. That's a domestic fight. Once was very, very highly pursued. Both guys' careers did not necessarily go in the upward trajectory that they were obviously expecting to a couple years ago when they were supposed to fight each other. Why not make it happen now? Buatsi's coming off a loss. Anthony Yarde's coming off a A victory that was not very inspiring. Both of those guys are on that next tier of light heavyweights where it's like, okay, listen, you guys are talented, you guys are good, but you guys need a little bit more work before you guys' name gets placed alongside those in that top tier of boxing. So I think Joshua Buatsi makes the most sense. I would have mentioned a guy like David Morrell in the discussion if was not already booked for a fight July 12th. There's what I got for Anthony Yard. Lyndon Arthur, I said this on Friday's show. He's going to have to make a decision. He's already accomplished what he's accomplished in boxing. I don't know what else there is for Lyndon Arthur to really accomplish that is realistic. This was a fight that the winner of this fight was going to be able to move on and see what they're going to do with their career moving forward. The loser's fight was going to have to reevaluate themselves. And I said that on Friday because there is a very, very stacked light heavyweight division. If you can't beat your opponent in that fight, then you're not going to be able to compete with the likes of that top tier I just listed. So what do you look at for these two guys now? Well, for Lyndon Arthur, they said he's going to have to decide if he wants to even continue. And if he so does want to continue, what is there for you to go pursue and go after? You know? Like Lyndon Arthur, like I said, he's talented, he's good, but he's not going to reach that high pinnacle of the sport again. So are you just going to go out there and cash out and just get some big fights or whatever you can do to cash out in the final years? That might be what makes most sense for his career going forward. So who do I have listed for him? Well, one guy, if you want to try pursuing to continue to move your way back up the ranks, Malik Zanad's a guy that comes to mind. Now, for those of you that are not familiar with who I just said, Malik Zanad is the guy that fought Dimitri Bivol on short notice on June 1st of last year at the Riyadh season card. Went 6 rounds with him. He's also had a good KO victory. I think it was in March, if I'm not mistaken. So Malik Zanad's obviously a solid fighter. Very, very similar. I think he's ranked in the top 11 and 2 or 3 of the organizations there. So that could be a fight that makes sense. Also, you go against a couple of local guys, or domestic guys, I should say. Willie Hutchinson makes sense. Zach Parker. Both those guys could be fights that do make sense for both parties there. Like I said, it really comes down to what does Lyndon Arthur want. I can't answer that for him. If it was up to me, I'd say, okay, you have to evaluate yourself, man. You're not going to reach the pinnacle most likely again. Do you want to just keep taxing your body with these fights? That's up to him to decide. Now, out of the guy that did just list, Willie Hutchinson, I've said this last week, I really want to see Willie Hutchinson fight Ben Whitaker next. I think that makes the most sense for both guys' careers. I would love to see that happen. But if that's not on the table, obviously Willie Hutchinson and Lyndon Arthur could make sense there. Let's go to the other fight that I had next. And it was Aaron McKenna defeating Liam Smith via unanimous decision. The scorecards there, 119-108, 117-109, 118-108. The point is, say the scorecards whatever you want. It was a routing. It was not a competitive fight. Aaron McKenna, I mean, he showed his youth in that fight, to say the least. And I said this, and this is not shocking. It's actually what I predicted to have happened on Friday. Not to this extent. I'm not going to say I was expecting Liam Smith to probably debatably not even win a single round. But what I did expect was saying, hey, I love the way Aaron McKenna fights. So many people were ignoring him, did not know who he was heading into this fight, or at least maybe casual fans, I should say, didn't know who Aaron McKenna was. And this was a big test. Sure, I was a big fan of him. I love what he brought to the table. But I haven't seen him perform at this stage in this type of atmosphere against this type of opposition. And when I sat back and watched this, was it a good fight? No, because there was no competition for Aaron McKenna. He walked into this fight and just ran circles around Liam Smith. And I get it. I said that for Liam Smith, I didn't think he was going to win this fight. 2 years of inactivity. You talk about being at his age, 36 years old. He's gone through a lot of different fights already. You know, wear and tear, so on and so forth. This was going to be the last hurrah, in a sense, for Liam Smith. If he won, he would continue. I didn't think he was going to win. And therefore, I think the opposition and the answer from going forward is that, hey, thank you for the career. You've had a good run. There's nothing else to accomplish for Liam Smith anymore. It's probably time to hang it up. I don't ever want to be a guy to say, hey, you have to go retire, so on and so forth. But I think that's going to be the decision he has to make going forward. For Aaron McKenna, though, I said, listen, I feel like on Monday's show, I'm going to be able to come out here and say, listen, we have a new rising star in the middleweight division. Well, folks, we're on Monday now. And what I'm going to say confidently is we have a new rising star in the middleweight division. You can say whatever it was about inactivity for Liam Smith in this fight. Aaron McKenna came out on that fight night in front of a massive audience, a massive fan base, everything going on out there, and he performed to a T. He exceeded all expectations on that fight, where you could make a legitimate case that he won every single round of that fight. He got the drop in the 10th round as well there. He was phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. And let me say this, if you guys do not know his age, Aaron McKenna is currently only 25 years old. Now, his next fight will likely be at the age of 26. I believe his birthday is June or July. I can't remember off the top of my head. So he's going to be turning 26 very, very shortly. But when you look at the middleweight division, he is a rising star there. You can't deny the fact that he knows what he's doing. He's a very, very talented fighter. And when we talk about what he's going to bring to the table going forward, there's a lot of big, decent fights you could say for him to make this next step up. And no means am I going to call for him to go fight a champion or anyone in that top contending group. Here's some names for you guys, though. And I got a lot here because he is firmly in that top 15 now. I think we're going to see him in multiple bodies now move up. But here's the guys I've listed that I would like to see fights with. Shane Mosley Jr., probably the highest ranked guy I've listed here. I could see that fight. Shaquille Thompson makes sense. Troy Isley, I really would like to see that fight, to be honest. I think that would be a very, very exciting fight. Two young guys. I would be very intrigued in that one. That might be my favorite one listed here. Denzel Bentley, probably my second or maybe even tied for first favorite. I would love to see that fight right there. Kieran Conway and Josh Kelly. Now, Josh Kelly did just book a fight. I just saw it come through this morning, which is going to be fighting on I think it was going to be June 3rd, if I'm not mistaken. So that one obviously might be off the table now. But those are the different guys I see. Listen, he's not ready for a championship fight yet, but I think he could get one or two more fights in this year against some of the guys I just listed here. And what we do, I think that we're going to go look at potential fights come down the stretch here in the year where it may be heading into 2026. I think it could be maybe early 2026 or maybe spring of 2026. He could be in position to go fight a champion at 160. Not out of the question. I'm a very, very big fan on him. I like what Aaron McKenna brought. That's just what I'm going to say. I love what he brought to the table. I think he's going to be a legitimate threat going forward. So that's what I want to say about Aaron McKenna. Like I said, I was a big fan heading into the fight. I hyped him up. I loved what he did on Friday, and he proved me right in that situation. I was happy to see what he did there. So I think he's got more big fights coming in his way in the next couple of months now. Two more fights to break down this card that went down. And this was Vidal Riley versus Chevron Clark. Unanimous decision. The scorecards read this: 116, 112, 117, 111, 115, 113. 115, 113, not right. Way deep, way more split apart than that card right there. However, here's what I come away from that fight with. Riley's a good fighter. Listen, I was baffled by what C4 came out and tried doing to Vidal Riley in that fight. I gave a prediction. I couldn't have been more wrong. I was right in terms of the sense that I said, if it goes beyond 4 rounds, Riley's going to be your victor. That was correct. But the way that Clark came out and fought was baffling to me. Your entire career has been based upon the fact that when you get KOs, and that's what you want to do, it's within 4 or 5 rounds. You go for the KO. You're not trying to outbox a guy. You're not trying to use your footwork. You're not trying to do these different things. You're going for the KO. And yet you're fighting a younger fighter. And you thought now was the time to switch your entire game plan around to try to outbox Riley? It baffled me. It makes no sense. If you were going to win that fight, it was going to have to be by KO. You were not going to go the entire distance and win on the scorecards. That's not been your strategy. It's not been how you fought your entire career. Why make that change now? That's his question to answer. I was baffled. It made no sense to me they tried outboxing Riley. And what I saw in Riley was phenomenal. He looked great. His footwork, his movement, the way he moved around the ring, the way he boxed. He ran circles around Clark. Let's be honest. That was a pretty wide scorecard I had on that fight. And I stopped scoring it midway through because this fight was over. There was no point. Clark did not know what he was doing in there. And it was just a masterclass, if you want to say, by Riley. Very, very impressive performance. I think that him and McKenna were the two guys that obviously the main event was the best fight of the night. But Aaron McKenna, Vidal Riley, both those guys came out and I took a lot away from them. I said, listen, these are two guys that position themselves to be in a much, much better position going forward in their careers. They were very, very impressive. The fights were not very good because of their opponents. But their performances really made me look at themselves in a different light and say, okay, these guys got a bright future now. And for Vidal Riley, listen, this is a guy that has, for those that don't know his story, he was a celebrity. He grew up boxing in amateur ranks. He was a solid amateur. And then he comes up into the ranks and he becomes a much more famous YouTuber, if you want to call him, a social media presence, an influencer, so on and so forth. But this guy knows what he's doing. Like, he is a very, very good fighter. And I obviously he's far away from being a legitimate world champion and fighting the world stage and so on and so forth. But he is a good fighter that I'm excited to see going forward. As for C4, I don't know what's next for him. Because you're coming off 2 losses in a row now. You're 34 years old. And you just put on the most puzzling performance that I witnessed by him. Like I said, I just don't get why he wanted to try outboxing a younger guy when his strategy and what his strength is going for the KO. I don't get it. I have to imagine he's looking back at the film now and is questioning why he did that. But I can't answer that. I don't get it. That's what I have to say about him. So for him, he has to make a decision. What's he going to do going forward? Very similar to Liam Smith. Could it be retirement? Possibly. It's just that he's at such a late stage in his career now, coming off of 2 losses, a very underwhelming performance. Where do you go from now? Do you want to keep taking the beating against guys and work your way all the way back up again? I can't imagine that's what he wants to do, but maybe he has to make the decision. Now, let's go to who I just talked about, Dylan Riley, who I really, really do like. A couple different guys I see on the table, one of which is the guy I'm going to mention here very, very shortly. You could see a guy that he is ranked in the top 15 at the moment, Brandon Glanton, who did lose to CBS, who I'll talk about shortly. That could be on the table there. Obviously, his connection with Turkey, he just put these two guys together. They know each other. Could that make sense? Possibly. Another one I'd actually do like the most, though, Jack Massey. He's a guy that he went and fought Jai Opetaia. And let me just say this again. I said a very, very similar story to CBS. When you talk about Zurdo and Jai Opetaia, they are the 2 top guys at cruiserweight. And I think there is a gigantic gap between those 2 guys and everybody else in the division. And so when you talk about Jack and what he did in that fight against Jai Opetaia, yeah, he got beat down. It was not a competitive fight. But Jai Opetaia is a special, special guy that I think has a chance to work his way into the pound-for-pound rankings in the future. Same thing with Zurdo, obviously, when he fought CBS. And what I said on Friday was, listen, for CBS, he's a good fighter, but we have to acknowledge the fact that, listen, there's a gap between them and the top guys. And so for Jack Massey, obviously, he has not fought now in a little bit. He's trying to work on a fight. He actually is going to come on the show very shortly once he gets his next fight announced. But this is a guy that could see a potentially making sense for himself. A guy that's ranked in the top 15 across a couple different commission boards. I could see that making sense for Vidal Riley as the next step up. But regardless of the case, I think Vidal Riley is the guy that we're going to look to and say, hey, he's an appealing prospect. He's the guy to keep your eye on. And I really do like what he brings to the cruiserweight division. I was thoroughly impressed with what he brought to the table. Let's talk about the final fight now. Or the very first fight, I should say, of the day, but the final fight I'm going to discuss today that happened this past weekend. Chris Billam-Smith versus Brandon Glanton. 116, 113, 116, 112, 116, 112 on the card. Unanimous decision for CBS. It was the right scorecard. Agree with that 100%. No issues there. Let me break down this fight, though. It was a little bit uninspiring at the same time as what I expected. I said that this fight was likely going to go the distance. That's what happened. And what I witnessed about CBS is that, listen, this is not a guy that is going to always be a KO machine. He's a guy that's going to go the distance. His endurance is phenomenal. That guy can take and absorb punches. He also can dish them out and go for 12 rounds. No problem. He's got insane endurance there. And I think that display against Brandon Glanton was fine. He had some good moments, won some rounds. CBS was the obvious victor. There's not much to take away from it. It wasn't the greatest fight in the world to watch. I think it was a very, very easy card or fight to go and scorecard there. So there's not really much I'm going to dive into in this fight. It is what it is. It happened. And so what's next for these guys? For Brandon Glanton, like I said, Chevron Clark could make sense for himself. You could also go down the Riley fight. Both those could hypothetically be in the mix for him. But once again, he's older. What do you want to do next? You have to build your way back up. Same story for C4. I think he has a little bit better opportunity, set himself up for a little bit better. But still, question to be asked there. But that's for him. As for CBS, there's a lot riding on the table what happens to the cruiserweight division at the top. I just talked about the fact about Zurdo and Jai Opetaia. I hope Jai Opetaia does have a fight upcoming now in 6 weeks. Jai Opetaia, Zurdo needs to happen soon. We need the 3 belts unified. That needs to happen for the cruiserweight division. Get those 2 guys going. Outside of that, everything else kind of comes to fruition now when you talk about this weight class. For Chris Billam-Smith, I think you do have to kind of wait out and see what happens now. Because of this reason, if those guys unify, you could obviously go for the winner of what's going to be fighting on Saturday night in Riyadh season between Badou Jack, Noel Mikaelian. Those 2 guys could very likely be the fighter that Chris Billam-Smith goes and fights for a world championship against. You could also see Hussein Sinalark. You also could see Michael Sislak. Those are the different guys I see on the table. Those are the top contenders currently at cruiserweight. Obviously, I don't think he should have any business going up and fighting Jai Opetaia or Zurdo. Although I could see it. I know there is some hype around the fact that Chris Billam-Smith and Jai Opetaia, I don't think it's a competitive fight whatsoever. But we could see that top fight come to fruition in the future. So I think a lot of it does come to what's going to happen between Chris Billam-Smith or between Zurdo and Jai Opetaia. Do they get the unification booked? If so, the rest of the division can kind of go book their fights and set themselves up for who's going to challenge those 2 guys, or the winner of that fight in the future. That's what I've got for that fight breakdown now. Now, there's a few other things I want to get into real quick before I wrap today's show up. And it's going to be talking about the 147 division. Well, actually, before I go into that, I want to see some of the comments real quick to get back to some people talking here. For tracks, yes, I definitely do appreciate your commenting, coming on here. Yes, Aaron was definitely a show for me, a star of the show for me as well. Very, very impressive. So yeah, if anybody wants to ever comment or talk about anything in the show, feel free to go in the comment section. I'll try to talk to you guys, answer questions you guys might have. It's totally available to you guys. I'll do that probably depending on each segment. They'll probably go after each segment and answer questions in the comments. So feel free to reach out in the comment section, whatever, and I'll answer those questions for you guys. But that being said, though, let's get into the 147-pound division. I gave a brief preview of that when I was talking about Conor Benn, the Chris Eubank fight, but I really want to get into 147 for you guys. It'll outline this division for you guys. And the reason I want to do that is because a few months ago, I had a segment on my show where I said, listen, 147 is a mess right now. There's a lot of talented fighters that don't want to fight each other. We won't get the big fights. People are claiming this guy's ducking, this guy's ducking, this guy's ducking. Was that true? I have no clue. But here's what I can say. I feel confident that right now 147 is in a very, very good place and is getting to that point right now. Let me outline the division for you guys. The 3 current champions, Boots Ennis has 2 of the belts. Mario Barrios has 1 belt. Brian Norman Jr. has 1 belt. I really, really would like to see what happens between those guys. I would like a unification fight between those guys eventually happen. But there's a lot of names down the play now that maybe will prevent a unification in the near future. Obviously, we know Boots Ennis has to go and defend his belt in a mandatory defense very, very shortly now. Also, we have another couple of things coming up where Brian Norman's going to be fighting Jin Sasaki in June, as I alluded to. Mario Barrios is supposedly, and I said this before, I hope you guys are not happening, but he's supposedly going to be fighting Manny Pacquiao in the near future. I hope that gets put aside. But that's what we got for the champions currently. But here's why I'm excited. When you talk about the contenders right now, you have a guy who I interviewed last week, Talani Mbenge. He's the IBO champion at the moment. He's going to be fighting on Thursday. If he has a great performance there, it could set himself up to be a challenger for one of these champions right now. Jin Sasaki is a guy that I really, really do like. Lewis Crocker, Patty Donovan, that rematch will be happening very, very soon. And that winner will obviously emerge as somebody that's going to come out of there and say, okay, this guy's a legitimate threat as well. Let's go to Rohan Polanco. He's fighting this upcoming weekend on the Inoue undercard. That's got to keep an eye on. Stanionis. I think Boots Ennis had one heck of a performance when they fought. I still think he's a great fighter. He's someone to keep in the mix. Then you talk about the next big names I want to talk about. Conor Benn, who, as I just said, his name is bigger than it's probably ever been in his career. He could go and fight for world championship immediately if he can make that weight cut. Then you have the 3 guys that are all debatably potentially moving up, at least has been rumored, that's fighting on Friday's New York City Times Square card. Ryan Garcia, Devin Haney, Teofimo Lopez. If you can get those 3 guys and how big of a branded name that they all have, pair them with Conor Benn and Boots Ennis, and then all these other really solid fighters that maybe don't have as big of a name as those guys do, welterweight division is starting to look really, really good. It's getting very, very exciting. There's a lot of big fights you can make there. I personally, as I said this last week on last week's show, I would love to see Ryan Garcia and Boots Ennis. Now, Ryan Garcia, I'd prefer to him go fight Barrios, get the world championship, and make that a unification fight. But that is on the table right there. But there's a lot of big fights to make here. And I think 147 is a division, like I said, is really starting to come together now. It makes a lot more sense for what we could see in the future. And it's starting to make sense. Now, what has to happen is you got to start fighting each other. Brian Norman fighting Jin Sasaki is a start. Obviously, Boots Ennis is unified. Great. What is Conor Benn going to do? Is he going to 147? If he does, this makes a big difference. 147 becomes a lot more popping now. And does Teofimo Lopez, Devin Haney, Ryan Garcia, or at least a combination of those guys, move up to 147 officially and start their careers off there now? If that is the case, you could have obviously the rematch of Ryan Garcia, Devin Haney. Ryan Garcia could go for the belt. So many things could be made at 147, and that's why I'm excited. Because I think 147 is a division and weight class that we have to keep our eyes on. Because come the next 3, 4, 5 months, we could have a lot more clarity on how that division is going to pan out. And there's lots and lots of big fights to make in that weight class. So that's what I want to say. I just want to say 147 is very exciting now. I think we're finally going to be making a breakthrough point in the welterweight division. It's just a good thing because it's been a mess for the past couple of years. I'm going to go through the comments real quickly now, and then I'll wrap this show. For Trax, what do you say? Do you find CBS fights not very attractive? I like his fights, but the crossover appeal is 0. I kind of do agree with you right there, man. When you talk about CBS, he's the guy that gets the job done to a certain extent. I think it does limit his capabilities to a extent. Like I said, he's not going to be a guy that ever reaches the Jai Opetaia Zurdo level. He is a world champion. Maybe he becomes that again. I don't know if Zurdo or Jai Opetaia remain in the weight class too much longer. I think they might test the waters at heavyweight. So could CBS become world champion again? Sure. But when I look at CBS, yeah, his fights are not going to be very, very entertaining. He doesn't have extreme knockout power, nor is he the most skilled guy. But like I said, I think his greatest attribute is he is extremely well at endurance and condition. We go back to the Zerto fight. I don't know how he lasted that long and how he was able to sustain the hits. He was not making a competitive fight, but he went to war and somehow didn't drop for a very, very long time. And he had an incredible fight there. I mean, in terms of the fact of just staying with that fight, obviously there's a massive gap. Zero destroyed him in that fight. But I think his biggest attribute is his endurance. And when you have that level of endurance and you fight the cruiserweight division, who typically does not have the most skilled guys, it's going to lead to a lot of wins for yourself going to the decision. And that's why I think we see a lot through his career. The only thing is that when you do get to that next level, I think that you're not going to be able to go up against a guy like Zerto or Jai Pataya because of the fact that you add in they have the skill and the power. And so when you fight that level of opposition, it's not going to go well for you, as we saw with Zerto, and I think we would see if we see a Jai Pataya fight. However, the rest of the cruiserweight division is not very, very good. There's a lot of guys that are obviously not as big as heavyweight guys that we know, but they're still big guys. They don't have the skill. They don't have the movement. They don't have the likes of what Jai Pataya and Zerto do have. Therefore, he's going to be able to go the distance in a lot of fights. And if it goes the distance because of his endurance, it's going to lead to a lot of wins. So that's what I do for CBS. But no, obviously, is he the box office guy? Absolutely not. He's not a guy that's going to headline a lot of fights unless it's for a world championship. But he's a good fighter. He's solid. He's there, I guess you could say. But that's my thoughts on CBS. So I do appreciate you for tuning in to the tracks. I definitely appreciate you. And like I said before, anybody that ever wants to say any comments or come on, whatever it is, just hit me up in the comments. I'll try to answer some questions and we'll break down those topics on the show. So that's what I got for you guys on today's show. I do have 4 more shows planned for this week. A lot of different things planned this week that I hope you guys are going to tune in for, because listen, this is going to be a crazy 8 days of boxing. For boxing fans, let me just outline this real quickly. This 8 days is exceptional. I was a little bit skeptical what was going to happen Saturday because of the fact, okay, do we have Conor Benn and Eubank? Is this going to be a good fight? Obviously, that was an incredible fight. And now we head into what is insane, because we have Friday, Saturday, and Sunday of world championship type level fights. Now, they're not the best 1v1 fights in the world, but listen, you have the likes of Ryan Garcia, Devin Haney, Teofimo Lopez. You have Canelo Alvarez, Marlon Bacoli, Jaime Munguia's rematch fight coming up. You have 2 undisputed championship fights going on. Inoue is fighting. And obviously, there's a lot more guys on the table. So there's going to be a lot to cover. I plan on Friday's show being dedicated with no guests, entirely to previewing everything that's going to happen Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. As for the next couple of days, though, I have a lot of guests planning to come on the show. Hopefully, you guys can tune into those interviews. Also, have personal segments, too. So I appreciate you guys all for tuning in today. I'll see you guys tomorrow. May God bless you guys all. SchuZ out. I'll see you guys tomorrow. God bless you guys.